So, our fifth valuing voices principle is reflection and learning. And we define this in several types of ways. So, in our own team, we've been having regular team reflections, and that's been a key part of project delivery and of team building. And those are different to team meetings. They're the kind of quarterly meetings, extended meetings where we have structured time for reflection on how the project is going. So we're thinking about that kind of regular team reflection built into research projects. And that comes with revisions according to learning, so adjusting the course of the project in response to what reflection brings up. Constantly thinking about project evaluation that helps, steer the way and helps gather feedback from a broad range of people, potentially some stakeholders, those users of your outputs, and acknowledging failures where you see them. That's a really key part of being able to reflect well and of gathering learnings. And it's not always easy, um, but there's a lot of value in doing so. And we believe in sharing that value with the research community. So being transparent, about what's gone well, what hasn't, and making sure that when we do, come across those really useful learnings, we're sharing them so that everyone can benefit from them. On our Valuing Voices tool, we've got lots of resources related to reflection, and this is just one of the very kind of simple ones, which is one of the more simple models of reflection. And it's, as you can see, it's about having the experience, whatever that might be, good or bad, building in that time to reflect on it. What has it meant? How has that experience gone? What have you learned from it? What can you reflect on that you might not have picked up in the moment of it happening, but kind of is that structured reflection? And what action are you going to take from all of that? So you've reflected, you've got your learnings. What are you going to do with them? And that's a really key piece of the puzzle. So why reflect? What's the value in reflecting and learning? Well, we at Valuing Voices believe that research practices are made effective and robust when they're informed by reflective learning. So it's about ensuring that the project is as good as it can be, that it does have that robustness and accountability built into it too. And I think it goes, hand in hand with research practice, that as researchers, we can become better by reflecting and learning regularly. And then we can become more robust in our own practice, yes, in research projects, but in our longer career trajectory too. There are lots of different types of reflection, and you may be working in a research team, but you may also be working independently. You might be a PGR, an early career scholar, and you are building up towards working in that team. And you might even be supporting researchers to do this kind of work. So there's group-based and individual reflection, and it's very important to structure this time in some way. It really does help with the process itself. And here are just a few ideas of how to do that. So there's kind of, aside from academic writing, there's that more reflective writing. It might take the form of blogging or journaling or even posting on social media to think through experiences, and see what arises from them through the act of writing or, potentially talking, if you have a video blog. Writing reflective essays and reports, and there's plenty of places to publish these too if something really good comes out of that. The kind of more informal spaces where we talk about research often come in the form of reflective essays and reports that make summaries of, that allow for thinking through again of those experiences that happen in the moment. in which we can't always take everything in. There are organizing tools like mind maps and flowcharts to really help you get your ideas and reflections down and make sense of them. Analytic approaches, I guess again, that more kind of rigorous approach to thinking about what's come from things, analyzing that in more detail, potentially organizing some of those findings again and thinking what to do with them from there. And I'll talk about an approach we've taken in a moment that relates to that. There are often also lots of creative ways to do this, and it can be a form of creative outlet. Group presentations, performances, expressive media in videos, poetry, dance, music, and art. And even contemplative practices like meditation and mindfulness can bring the space in which to reflect, can be that form, that container that allows reflection to happen, and brings learning with it. Something that we tried in one of our own reflective meetings was ripple effect mapping, which I think I speak for the whole team when we said we found it a very valuable activity in terms of um, not just evaluating impact, which is what it's made to do, but also of coming together as a team and having a chance to reflect on what we've done. So ripple effects mapping is it was conceived of in the 80s in the US in a kind of community research setting. It is primarily used as a way to map the impact of projects that may involve lots of stakeholders and may have unwieldy impacts. And it's known well for allowing you to identify as a team, it's a team activity, identify the impacts of a project that are intended. So did what you set out to do happen, but also to identify those unintended impacts. And you can see there in the picture the slightly messy visual way that we do that. You set out a timeline of major events that have happened, and you map them along the way. And from there, you can kind of map the impacts that happened outwards. But it's a really good activity because it's also got that team bonding element and team building where you can talk together and bring your kind of memories and experiences together of the project and consolidate them. And also it's a moment in which to really reflect on what you've achieved and where things haven't worked as well as you wanted to. And this is a process that should happen, throughout a project several times. It's not a one-off event. Um, we found it very useful. As I've said, it's about mapping impacts and adding detail about them to really see what's worked and how you've got there. And then there's a bit of analysis that goes with it after you've mapped this. And it's worth saying that you wouldn't sit down and do this for the whole project. You take a specific part of the project that you wanted to think about. So, for example, here we were looking at our communication strategy. How well has that worked? So it's pulling out a specific strand and really digging into the impact, but it really does give you that time and space. And after that, you can go through kind of the pathways that you've made and choose the most and the least significant impact. So see what's gone really well, what hasn't, and also what you might want to do more of. Um, and then, reflect on that together as a team as well. So that's been really valuable as a group activity. Another group activity that we haven't tried as a team, but is popular again in um in as a group reflective activity is the river of life, and this is where you kind of visualize the journey of a project. And again, it's got that creative element, and it's about imagining the journey of the project as a river and the obstacles that you've come across along the way, the destination you might be trying to get to, and where you might have stopped along that river. And really, it's great for having those conversations, starting conversations about the project. And conversation, itself is reflection, particularly in these group contexts. It is where those reflections come from and where the learning is drawn out of. This is also a good activity for that big picture, a bit like ripple mapping. It might not give you every single detail of what's going on, but it does allow you to visualize the kind of major touch points of a project, which can often, be hard to do. And when project team members are spread out and you're all meeting on Zoom irregularly, these moments of consolidating can be really, really important. And again, like ripple mapping, it gives you that context for future planning. It's a moment to say, this is where we've come from, this is where we are, and this is how we've got here. Where do we want to go next?
I learned a lot just from Alex's experiences here. And as I mean, he talked about a lot about group reflection, but also about individual reflection. I think there's often an overlap there. Um, but before Alex talked, we hit on two examples about group reflection, and I just want to go in a little bit more into individual reflection activities. So. One thing that's really important is that when something happens, sometimes something just happens when you're working. You have a moment of realization or a feel. It can even be a physical feeling, and your whole perspective just changes. And so we would say it's really important to unpack what happens at moments like that and take some time to reflect on that. I think it happened to Lucy and I when we talked about valuing voices abroad and saw some incredible projects and basically had to talk through it to sort of make sense of what had happened and how it fed into our project and how we could tell those stories. So it's important to sit with that for a bit. Of course, the most usual way we as in the academic environment reflect is in writing. So reflective writing is what we used to if we're reflecting at all, which we probably are already because you're writing reports and so on and so forth. And you can use that reflective writing also to think about your own individual experiences. And so it's great for just doing on your own, doing it little and often. I myself, I've got a little notebook on my desk, and every once in a while I'll just have to write something down. It's also great for practicing the use of language for exploring outcomes, interpretation, analysis, evaluation. So you're really honing your skills in writing in that way. And Alex touched on this as well. It improves skills and employability. You can actually, especially if you then turn things into blogs or other outputs, it can also display your skills. But as I said before, writing is probably a comfort zone, and creative, expressive activities, well, if I speak for myself, are definitely not. And I feel that that's often the case. And so nevertheless, I want to fly the flag for creative and expressive activities. They are great for externalizing, so sort of like instead of really consciously thinking, you're sort of going through motions, and all of a sudden you start to observe thoughts that may pop up in your head. It's great for mental well-being and for inclusivity. And that last one, inclusivity, that's been always sort of my stumbling block, because I work a lot with patients and patient involvement in research, and I always thought, you can't ask that patients. You can't ask people to step out of their comfort zone, because they may not be comfortable all of a sudden writing poetry or coming up with I don't know any kind of creative activity. They may just not be comfortable with that. But I was proved wrong by some involvement colleagues from Sheffield and Leeds who insisted on running an creative activity with some patients. And so to make it inclusive, they said, well, we want them to reflect on this experience, but we want them to do it in whatever way they feel comfortable. So instead of us saying, oh, you have to write a poem or you have to draw a picture, they were entirely free to do whatever they wanted. So the sort of the minimum efforts, if they wanted to make any effort at all, was to just put the experience in 3 words. But the sky was the limit. They could do anything, and it turned out to be amazing. Really, people wrote songs, people wrote poems, people drew pictures, and the picture you see here, I actually drew myself to my own surprise. And when I was doing that, I really felt that externalizing, so observing yourself and your experience, was really true, because all of a sudden thoughts started flooding in that I hadn't really thought through before. So, for example, I was drawing this globe, and I was thinking about people talking different languages, so not necessarily foreign languages, but there's a difference between patients speaking one language and researchers another. I was also thinking about physical distance, that even may live in the same country, we all live in bubbles, and so on and so forth. So it was really revealing, and it was also fun. So mental well-being is definitely a factor to consider as well. I mean, you usually want your work to be fun in some way, if possible at all. So so that's just what I wanted to highlight here. That maybe it's useful to step out of your comfort zone sometime and try something different, either for yourself or as a group. So yeah, those have been some major lessons for me about reflection, and now handing back to Lucy.
Thanks, Karen. I think is the phrase the unexamined life is not worth living. Um, is maybe a very extreme version of that, but it's important that we understand where we're at and where we're coming from. And it does bring you great value. You don't have to do that alone, so there's lots of help out there. We've mentioned lots of methods today, ways to structure and scaffold reflection, which is really, really important because, as Karen mentioned there, you can't be expected to start from nowhere with this. Having starting points and scaffolding your thinking is really important and can really help get the best out of these activities. So, on the staff resources, there's a reflective writing practical guide, which is really useful, and we've taken quite a bit of today's session from that guide. So, that's put together by the library, and I highly recommend having a look at that. On our own tool, which I'll be going through in a second, we have lots of resources on reflection and learning about writing, about creative methods, sets of questions to ask yourself if you just want to sit down for 5 minutes and have a think, and checklists if you want to have that reminder, to do this and to start building it into practice, which was really what Alex's presentation was about there. How do you become a reflective learner throughout the whole of a project, and then how does that become part of your practice as a researcher? And there's some training out there. We haven't found loads, have we, Karen? But we've found there's a course on FutureLearn which looks very, very good. I think it's from Coventry University on international leadership and reflective practice within leadership. Um, so that's worth having a look if you want to know more about it. So just a very quick whiz through the Valuing Voices tool, really, just to show you what's there to look at after the session and as you go forward. So as we've made very clear, reflection and learning is one of our principles, and on the tool itself, which is open source, it's online, free to anyone to use it. We have lots of information about the principle, although you're at this deep dive, so you'll know as much as is on there on that first page. But there are lots and lots of resources, as I've mentioned, to why have no resources been found for reflection and learning? Um, there should be lots and lots of resources here that you can search via the principles. I have to have a look at that, why that's happened. But you can see them there. There's different models, as I've said, checklists. There's a few research projects that have gone on at other universities as well, who've done some deep dives into building a reflective practice. So I do highly recommend that you go and have a look at some of those resources to take what we've talked about today further and to put some of it into practice. And then you can use the tool, which we've been kind of mentioning throughout. And if you haven't seen it before, um, the Valuing Voices tool is based on results-based planning methods, and it takes you through 4 questions. And results-based planning essentially means that you start with the end in mind. So instead of thinking, what do I need to have, and then what am I going to achieve, you think, what do I want to achieve? Being ambitious, and having, as we mentioned earlier, that ultimate outcome for how you want to see this principle being embedded in a research project, or even a research activity if it's at that level. So there's lots of prompts on there. The tool takes you through these 4 questions, as I've said. What does successful reflection and learning look like? How will you deliver the outcome? What actions do you need to get you there? And what resources do you need? And we're going to have a little closer look at how you might fill that in a second. So on the tool itself, you can type into these boxes and it will save your answers. Say if you were working on a grant application and you really wanted to get together some text for thinking about how you're going to embed reflection and learning throughout the project and articulate it to a funder, or if you're a PGR, if you're an ECR, you might be thinking, okay, how do I become a reflective researcher? And you can note down things in here and start really planning for strategies to put that into practice. So if we head back to the slides, I've got an example here of how you might fill out those questions, and this is really in relation to our own project. So the tool is a context-based piece of equipment really for you to use, and really think about how these principles relate specifically to your context. So not producing that kind of boilerplate text, but thinking authentically what these principles mean to you. And for us, we've stuck with that overall outcome of thinking, what does successful reflection and learning look like in our project? Well, we've wanted space for reflection to lead to new insights that enhance overall project outcomes. And we've really worked hard to share those learnings with the community. We've gone to well, as I mentioned, we've gone to lots of conferences, but that was one aim of this project, was really to, if we embed reflective practice, then we want it to benefit the whole research community. So how have we delivered, or how will we deliver those outcomes? Well, we will need regular space and structure for reflection. As I've said, it's quite difficult. It doesn't just happen. It might not be something that you naturally turn to. So it's really about thinking practically about where you're going to embed that time in a timeline. And that's something that we took quite seriously. And proactively seeking those opportunities to share learning with a variety of research-focused audiences internationally. That was another intention that we had, particularly with our kind of international focused project as well. So those are just a few examples of how we thought about answers to these questions. And the actions that we've taken forward and that we put into that plan, we've had quarterly reflection meetings with the whole team. And I've mentioned the ripple mapping effect kind of was one of those sessions. We have structured those sessions. They're different from a team meeting in the sense that they have that reflective structure. We've spent sessions reviewing our theory of change. We often use those sessions to think through significant impacts of the project as well and think about how we're capturing that, again, with those participatory methods. to reflect and review mechanisms that we've used at team meetings. So we've used lots of different inclusive techniques and facilitation techniques to make our team meetings more effective and to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak and put their ideas forward at those meetings. And so we've reflected and reviewed on how that's worked, and we've developed some training as well that we've led on at York that have shared some of those findings with the research community. And we wanted to write an abstract for the International Research Culture Conference on what we'd learned and sharing reflections, which we did. So the inputs we needed for that time, lots of time, and that's the main thing with reflection. You need to set that time aside, and it needs to be quality time. And a bit in the same way with as you might think about writing. When is the right time? Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? When are those pinch points when you've got the energy and sometimes the creative energy to do that reflection really, really well? You might want an external facilitator for some of the activities, not necessary. But for example, with the Ripple Maps mapping exercise, I had been to some training and learnt how to facilitate that. And sometimes it can be good just to have someone else in the room to facilitate those reflection sessions with a team who's not embedded in the team every day and can spot opportunities to really draw things out. So that might be something you consider. And a budget for conference and accommodation because we wanted to share those learnings with the community. So just to say thank you very, very much for being here this afternoon, sharing our last deep dive. It's a principle that we've thought more and more about that's wrapped up in everything, really, but it's been good to think more about how it works in and of itself. We regularly post on LinkedIn. We have other sessions available on YouTube, and the tool is available free for you to use. So yes, we'll let you crack on with your afternoon now, but that's a big thank you from us for being here.
Thank you everyone for attending.